Mr. Who? Japan is considering flipping the order of its given and family names when talking to Westerners. Hi there. Thanks for joining us for episode 227 of Plain English. All your in-depth resources for this episode are available at plainenglish.com/227. Coming up today, Japanese people present themselves with their given names first and their family names last when talking to Westerners, but they do the opposite when talking to one another. Now, some people want to change that. In the second half of today's episode, we'll talk about the English expression bend to, and in the third half of the program, we have a song of the week. Politics aside, which of these isn't like the other? Xi Jinping, or Mr. Z, is the president of China. Moon Jae-in, or Mr. Moon, is the president of South Korea. And Shinzo Abe, or Mr. Abe, is the prime minister of Japan. Did you notice? In the cases of the Chinese and South Korean leaders, we in the West say their family names first and their given names second, as they do in their own countries. But we traditionally have said Japanese names with the given name first, family name second, even though they, in their own language, do the opposite. But now it is time, say many in Japan, for Westerners to flip the order and say Japanese names the way we say other Asian names, with the family name first. So from now on, we'll refer to Abe Shinzo, which is how he's referred to in his own language. In English, especially in the US, we often call your given name your first name because here in our culture, it comes first. We say that your family name is your last name because it comes last. This causes minor confusion with many people in Latin America who use 4 names, 2 given and 2 family names. But a greater confusion arises when talking about Asian names where the family name comes first in order and the given name follows it. The Japanese recognized this about 150 years ago and purposely presented themselves with the Western naming convention when talking to Westerners. It was part of a broader movement to learn more modern Western ways of life, to open up their culture, and to accommodate a globalizing world. They didn't change the way they addressed each other at home, only the way they presented themselves to the Western world, to people who used the Latin alphabet. So for the last century and a half, all Japanese people have had 2 identities, if you will, the local one and the Western one. Japanese business cards often have 2 sides, a Japanese side with the name in the traditional order and an English side with the name reversed. The international press followed the same conventions. Sometimes, to avoid confusion, Japanese people will capitalize their family name when filling out forms. Even in Japan itself, official government documents showed the given name first when the names are presented in the Latin alphabet. Now, some of that may be about to change. As of the first of this year, 2020, Japan will no longer put the given name first in official documents that are written in the Latin alphabet. The Japanese foreign minister, Kono Taro, has requested that world leaders follow suit when pronouncing Japanese names. The Olympics are coming to Tokyo this summer, and Japan has asked television stations to identify athletes with their family names first. It's a popular move. Almost 60% of Japanese are in favor of restoring the traditional family name first convention in all cases. And why not? If 150 years ago, Japan had to bend to the Western world's conventions to facilitate its rise, that is certainly not the case now. Westerners have little trouble with the names of the Chinese, Taiwanese, Hong Kongers, South Koreans, or North Koreans, and if they do, it's just cause for minor embarrassment or an awkward moment. Now, there is another view. Some worry that reverting to the traditional name ordering could send a signal to the world that Japan is retreating into itself, that it's not as open to the rest of the world as it previously has been. By reversing the name order to fit the right context, Japanese people show flexibility and respect toward others' customs, according to this view. One person likened it to the dinner table. A Japanese person can use a fork and knife when eating at a Western table and switch to chopsticks back home. This isn't the only confusing aspect of Japanese names. Unlike in most countries, it is the law in Japan, the law for two married people to have the same family name. Either way works for me. The only thing I don't want is for some people to want to be addressed one way and other people to want the opposite. That I would have a hard time with. Quick reminder to get a summary of each new episode with additional learning resources every Monday and Thursday. Sign up at plainenglish.com/mail, plainenglish.com/mail. I'm not going to lie, today's expression is difficult. It is to bend to. Let's first start with the literal meaning of bend. Use bend when something starts straight but later becomes curved. Picture the branch of a tree. Not a big one, a small one, a living one. If you pull down on one end, you might make that branch curve a little bit. If you do, the branch is bending. You drive down a straight road, and then the road turns just a little to the left or the right? In that case, the road bends to the right or to the left. You can bend your knees, make them not straight. You can bend over if you want to reach forward and bend your whole body at your hips. So that's bend. You ought to know that word. If you don't know that word, look it up in a multilingual dictionary because it's a good word to know. But that's not it. And that's not how I used it in the first part of this episode. Here's what I said. About 150 years ago, Japan believed that it had to bend to the Western world's conventions in order to grow as a great power itself. Japan had to bend to the Western world's conventions. In this example, bend to means Japan had to change a little bit to be more like or to please another party, in this case, the Western world. I want to emphasize a little bit. In English, we often draw a distinction between the words bend and break. So go back to the tree branch example. If you pull down too hard on a branch, you might break it off. Or if the tree branch is dead, you might break it off. To bend is really to change shape a little. When Japan bends to the Western world's conventions, Japan isn't making a radical change. It's not like Abe Shinzo becomes John Smith. It just becomes Shinzo Abe. Just a little change. Japan is bending to Western conventions. The most common way to use bend to in this sense is to say bend to someone's will. To bend to someone's will means to make little changes so that another person is happy. To make little changes so that another person is happy. A politician can bend to the will of wealthy supporters. A wealthy supporter gives a lot of money to a politician's campaign. Maybe they supply a lot of volunteer hours. They have some influence with what that politician does in the future. And that politician might bend to the will of that supporter. At least here in the US, that doesn't mean that the politician only does what that supporter wants. And it doesn't mean that the politician makes radical changes just because of that supporter. But it does mean that the politician might make little changes, might take little actions that others might not notice, but that nonetheless help that supporter. Now, if the supporter pays a bribe and the politician awards him a contract, then that's different. That's not bending to someone's will. That's making a big change. Bending to someone's will is making small changes to make that person happy. Let me give you another example. I doubt this is true in other parts of the world. Maybe it is. But here in the United States, when big companies want to build a factory or move their headquarters, they go to the local government and they say, we want to create 500 jobs in your little town, but we're only going to do this if you give us stuff. For example, they want a special tax break, or they want, I don't know, an exception to some building code rules. They want something. It's generally not outrageous, but they want something more than what Joe's Hardware on Main Street gets. And very often, the cities will bend to the will of the large companies because the leaders of that city want jobs for their town, and they want to take credit for bringing a large company to town. If they don't bend to the will of this company, then another town or another state nearby just may bend to that company's will. Today's song of the week is House of the Rising Sun by The Animals. It's a classic rock song from 1964 and a really popular song on classic rock radio stations. It was originally sung from the perspective of a woman, but the version by The Animals tells a sad story of a man who follows his father into a gambling addiction. There is a brief tie-in to today's episode. Japan is often called the land of the rising sun. In fact, it has been known that way for 1,400 years. Land of the rising sun. Although the song House of the Rising Sun has nothing to do with Japan, we nevertheless thought it was appropriate for today. That'll do it for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back on Monday with another episode of Plain English. If you enjoyed today's episode, and if you can understand the words, then you might be ready for Plain English Plus. Come join fellow listeners from around the world and build your confidence, expand your vocabulary, and become a better English speaker. Plus members get access to in-depth video lessons, courses, a fast version of the podcast, and our famous interactive transcripts, so you never miss a word. If 2020 is the year for you to finally speak English with confidence, then let us be part of your success this year. Come join us at plainenglish.com/plus. plainenglish.com/plus.